Mary's medical center flickered with their usual sterile hum as 12-year-old Emma Richardson sat on the edge of the hospital bed, her small frame swallowed by the pale blue gown that hung loosely from her shoulders. Her long hair, once vibrant and full of life, now lay limp against her back, mirroring the exhaustion that had settled deep into her bones. It was a Tuesday afternoon in March, the kind of day when spring promises renewal but winter still clings stubbornly to the morning air. Emma had been admitted 3 days earlier with what her mother initially thought was just another bout of the flu. But this time was different. This time, the fever wouldn't break, the pain wouldn't subside, and the doctors' faces grew increasingly grave with each test result that came back. Marcus Jenkins stood in the doorway of room 347, his bright orange and blue sanitation worker's uniform a stark contrast to the muted whites and grays of the hospital corridor. At 34 years old, Marcus had been cleaning these halls for nearly a decade. He'd seen joy and sorrow, birth and death, hope and despair play out in these rooms like an endless drama where he remained perpetually backstage. But something about this particular room, this particular girl, had stopped him in his tracks. Through the partially open door, Marcus could see Emma's parents, Robert and Jennifer Richardson, standing with 2 doctors. He recognized the body language immediately. The way Jennifer's hand covered her mouth, how Robert's shoulders seemed to cave inward, the doctor's careful, measured gestures. Marcus had witnessed this scene too many times before. Bad news. Life-changing news. The kind of news that shatters worlds. Marcus knew he should move on. He had 12 more rooms to service on this floor alone, and his supervisor, Mr. Patterson, had already written him up twice this month for falling behind schedule. But his feet wouldn't cooperate. Something rooted him to that spot, some inexplicable pull that he couldn't quite name. Emma's diagnosis had come that morning: acute lymphoblastic leukemia. The words had hung in the air like broken glass, sharp and dangerous, cutting through every hope and plan the Richardson family had carefully constructed for their daughter's future. The doctors spoke of treatment protocols, survival rates, and clinical trials, but all Jennifer could hear was the blood rushing through her ears, a deafening white noise that drowned out everything except the word, cancer. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the attending oncologist, was patient and thorough. She'd delivered this kind of news hundreds of times, but it never got easier. "We'll begin chemotherapy immediately," she explained, her voice gentle but professional. "Emma's young, which works in her favor. The treatment will be aggressive, but we have every reason to be optimistic." Optimistic. The word felt obscene in the context of her daughter's life hanging in the balance, but Jennifer nodded mechanically, trying to process information that her brain refused to accept as real. Robert stood like a statue, his jaw clenched so tightly that Marcus could see the muscle twitching from across the room. He was a construction foreman, a man who solved problems with his hands, who built things from nothing. But here, in this sterile room with its machines and monitors and unfathomable diagnosis, he was utterly powerless. Emma, for her part, seemed almost detached from the conversation happening around her. She'd heard the word, cancer, understood enough to know that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. But sitting there on that hospital bed, all she could think about was her friend Lily's birthday party next weekend, the one she'd been looking forward to for months. Would she still be able to go? Would her hair fall out before then? Would the other kids at school treat her differently? As the doctors continued their explanation, Marcus finally forced himself to move. He pushed his cleaning cart forward, the wheels squeaking softly against the linoleum. He knocked gently on the doorframe, offering an apologetic smile. "Sorry to interrupt, folks. Just need to empty the trash and tidy up a bit. Won't take more than a few minutes." Dr. Mitchell nodded. "Of course. We were just finishing up anyway." She turned back to the Richardsons. "I'll give you some time to process all of this. The nurse will be in shortly to discuss the treatment schedule and what to expect over the next few days." As the doctors filed out, Marcus entered the room, moving with practiced efficiency. He'd learned long ago to make himself invisible in these moments, to give families the illusion of privacy while he performed his necessary duties. But as he bent to retrieve the small trash can near Emma's bedside, he made the mistake of looking directly at her. Their eyes met for just a moment, but in that brief connection, Marcus saw something that pierced through all his carefully constructed professional detachment. It wasn't fear he saw in Emma's eyes, or even sadness. It was confusion, the bewildered look of someone who'd been living in one reality and suddenly found themselves thrust into another without warning or consent. Marcus knew that look intimately. 15 years earlier, Marcus had been sitting in a hospital room not unlike this one, though in a far less prestigious facility across town. His younger brother, Devin, had been 10 years old when the gang violence that plagued their South Side neighborhood finally touched their family directly. A stray bullet through their apartment window during a drive-by shooting. Devin had been doing his homework at the kitchen table. Marcus had been 17, old enough to understand that the world was cruel and random, but not old enough to know how to carry the weight of that understanding. He'd sat beside Devin's hospital bed for 3 days before his little brother finally succumbed to his injuries. And in those 3 days, Marcus had made a silent promise. Somehow, someway, he would spend his life trying to bring small moments of light into the darkest places he could find. That promise had led him here, to this job that most people considered beneath notice. But Marcus had never seen it that way. To him, every room cleaned was an act of service, every smile offered to a grieving family a small rebellion against the cruelty he'd witnessed. "You've got pretty eyes," Marcus said softly to Emma as he worked, then immediately regretted it. What a stupid, inadequate thing to say. But Emma's lips twitched in something that might have been the ghost of a smile. "Thanks," she whispered. "My grandma always said that too. She sounds like a smart lady. She died last year. Cancer too." The words hung heavy in the air. Marcus paused in his work, straightening up to look at this brave girl who was already connecting the dots of her own fate to the grandmother she'd lost. Jennifer let out a small, wounded sound, and Robert's hand found hers, gripping tight. "I'm sorry to hear that," Marcus said, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. "I lost someone too. My little brother. He was just about your age." Marcus hadn't planned to share that. He never talked about Devin with patients or their families. But something about Emma's openness, her willingness to acknowledge the elephant in the room that everyone else was dancing around, demanded honesty in return. "Did it hurt?" Emma asked. "When he died, Emma," Jennifer gasped, but Marcus held up a gentle hand. "It's okay," he said, moving closer to Emma's bedside. He knelt down so they were at eye level. "Yes, it hurt. It hurt more than anything I'd ever felt before or since. But you know what? The hurt meant something. It meant I loved him. It meant his life mattered. And even though he's gone, all that love is still here. Marcus tapped his chest. It doesn't go away. It just changes shape. Emma considered this, her young face serious. I don't want to die. The statement was so simple, so heartbreakingly direct, that it seemed to suck all the air from the room. Jennifer started crying in earnest now, and Robert pulled both his wife and daughter into his arms, his own tears finally falling. Marcus stood slowly, giving the family their moment. He finished his work quietly, efficiently, but when he reached the door, he paused. For what it's worth, he said, I've worked in this hospital for 10 years. And Dr. Mitchell, she's one of the best. If anyone can help you fight this thing, it's her. It wasn't much. It wasn't enough. But it was something, and sometimes something was all you had to offer. Over the following weeks, Marcus found himself timing his cleaning schedule so that he'd pass by room 347. And later, when Emma was discharged, the outpatient oncology wing, during the hours when the Richardson family was most likely to be there. He told himself it was coincidence, that his route just happened to take him past at those particular times. But he knew better. He watched as Emma's hair began to fall out in clumps, as the bright-eyed girl from that first day grew pale and thin, as the chemotherapy ravaged her body in order to save it. He watched Robert age 10 years in 10 weeks, watched Jennifer transform from a polished marketing executive into a fierce warrior who'd forgotten what sleep felt like. And he watched as Emma, despite everything, fought with a courage that left him awed. One afternoon in late April, Marcus was cleaning the family waiting room when he noticed Emma sitting alone, a colorful scarf wrapped around her now bald head. Her parents were meeting with the oncology team, and she'd been left with a stack of magazines and strict instructions not to wander off. Mind if I take a quick break? Marcus asked, gesturing to the empty chair beside her. Emma shrugged, which Marcus took as permission. He sat down with a grateful sigh, his knees protesting after hours on his feet. How's the treatment going? He asked. It sucks, Emma said bluntly. Then, glancing up at him, sorry. I'm not supposed to say that word. Marcus smiled. Your secret's safe with me. And for the record, I think you're allowed to say it sucks when something genuinely does suck. They sat in companionable silence for a moment before Emma spoke again. Can I ask you something? Sure. Why are you so nice to me? I mean, it's your job to clean and stuff, but you always stop and talk. Most of the other workers just kind of pretend not to see us. It was a perceptive question, one that deserved an honest answer. Marcus thought carefully before responding. When my brother died, I felt really alone. Like I was drowning and everyone else was just going about their day, you know. I swore that if I ever had the chance, I'd try to make sure other people didn't feel that way. So that's what I'm doing. Making sure you know someone sees you. Emma's eyes, those pretty eyes he'd commented on that first day, filled with tears. Sometimes I feel invisible. Like I'm already a ghost and nobody's told me yet. The statement gutted him. Marcus reached out and took her small hand in his much larger one, noting how fragile she'd become. You're not a ghost, Emma. You're one of the bravest people I've ever met. And I've met a lot of people. I don't feel brave. I feel scared all the time. That's what brave is. Marcus told her. Being scared but doing it anyway. Emma squeezed his hand, and they sat like that until her parents emerged from their meeting, both looking exhausted but hopeful. The latest scans had shown that the tumors were responding to treatment. It was good news, great news even, but they all knew the road ahead was still long and uncertain. As summer gave way to fall, Marcus continued his quiet vigil. He celebrated with the Richardson family when Emma's scans came back clear, mourned with them when she developed complications from her treatment, and held his breath alongside them during every test, every procedure, every milestone. Other hospital workers began to notice Marcus's attachment to Emma's case. Some admired his compassion. Others warned him about getting too close, about the dangers of caring too much in a place where heartbreak was an occupational hazard. Marcus heard them all but changed nothing about his behavior. In October, nearly 8 months after that first meeting, Emma was declared to be in remission. The celebration in the oncology ward was subdued but genuine. Everyone knew that remission wasn't the same as cured, that vigilance would be necessary for years to come. But it was hope, tangible and real, and that was something worth celebrating. Marcus was cleaning the hallway outside the conference room where the Richardson family was meeting with Dr. Mitchell when Emma burst through the door, her mother calling after her to slow down. The girl, still thin, still pale, but with a spark of life returning to her eyes, ran straight to Marcus and threw her arms around his waist. "We did it," she said, her voice muffled against his uniform. "The cancer's gone." Marcus dropped his mop, not caring that it clattered loudly against the floor. He hugged Emma back, his eyes stinging with tears he'd been holding back for months. "You did it," he corrected gently. "You fought, and you won." Robert and Jennifer appeared in the doorway, both of them smiling through tears. "We wanted to thank you," Robert said, extending his hand to Marcus. "For everything. For seeing her when you didn't have to." Marcus shook his hand, then Jennifer's. "She made it easy," he said simply. But as he watched the Richardson family walk away down that hospital corridor, Emma skipping between her parents with energy he hadn't seen in months, Marcus felt something shift inside him. The ache of Devon's loss was still there, would always be there, but it felt different somehow. Less like an open wound and more like a scar, a reminder of love rather than just loss. Emma looked back over her shoulder and waved, her smile bright and genuine. Marcus waved back, then picked up his mop and returned to his work. There were other rooms to clean, other families struggling through their darkest hours. And while Marcus couldn't save them all, couldn't prevent every tragedy or cure every disease, he could do what he'd always done. He could see them, acknowledge their pain, and offer whatever small comfort his presence might provide. In a world of invisible wounds and silent suffering, sometimes being seen was the most healing thing of all. As Marcus moved down the hallway, he passed by Dr. Mitchell, who nodded at him with a knowing smile. She'd watched his journey with the Richardson family, had seen how his simple acts of kindness had provided an anchor during their storm. In a hospital full of sophisticated medical interventions and cutting-edge treatments, sometimes the most powerful medicine was still the oldest: human connection, compassion, and the willingness to stand witness to another person's suffering. The sun was setting outside the hospital windows, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Marcus paused for just a moment to watch it, allowing himself this small moment of grace. Tomorrow he'd be back, doing the same work, seeing the same sorrows. But tonight, at least, he'd helped carry one family through their darkness and out into the light. And that, Marcus thought as he resumed his work, was enough. It had to be enough. Because in the end, we're all just trying to make meaning from the chaos, to find light in the darkness, to transform our pain into purpose. And sometimes, just sometimes, we succeed.